Welcome to Sola Church Online. If you live in or near Santa Monica, we'd love for you to join us in person at Joslyn Park Auditorium, 633 Kensington Road. Our pre-recorded online service premieres every Sunday at 10 a.m. on our website as well as on Facebook and YouTube. We've got a great service for you today. Let's worship.
Worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, he parted the raging sea. My God, he holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is sure in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. As he hung up on that cross, then he rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is sure in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We were the beggars, but now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by his grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by his grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is sure in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is sure in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise.
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If these online services have been a blessing to you, it's super easy to make a one-time, tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring gift. Using your phone camera, just scan the QR code in the corner of the screen to access the giving portal. Alan and Miranda are under the weather this week, so, for Palm Sunday, we bring you this message from 2022, about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem.
So back in the 80s, I lived in Hollywood, and it wasn't unusual at all to run into celebrities. I'm sure you remember Molly Ringwald. She's still working, of course, but came to fame as a teenager, starring in movies like 16 Candles and The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink. And I remember the day that she came in to the place where I worked with her mother. I was on the floor, which was unusual for me, and they walked in together, Molly and her mother. They were looking for school supplies. And I just remember, my conversation with them. Really, it was all with her mother. Like, Molly didn't say a word and barely made eye contact, and she just seemed so shy, Movie stars, but not just movie stars, rock stars too. Like, I remember meeting Bobby Dahl from Poison backstage at Gazzari's, and when I ran into him, it was like when Poison had just, really started to break big. And so I congratulated Bobby on the success that they were having, and he thanked me and asked me for a cigarette. I didn't smoke, so I couldn't help him out with that. I got tattooed next to Nikki Sixx, Sunset Strip Tattoo. Nikki Sixx, of course, is in Motley Crue. Motley was rehearsing for the tour that they were just about to head out on, and Nikki had just bought a brand new motorcycle, so he'd ridden his bike to the shop, and like halfway through his tattoo, he went out for a spin on his new bike and came back, and he seemed like he was really happy. But in recent years, he released a book about his life drawn from journals that he kept at that time, and the title of the book, The Heroin Diaries. Nikki was really struggling. So in relating these stories, I mean no disrespect at all to any of the people that I've talked about. In fact, I'm grateful to each one of them for the joy they've brought me with their movies and with their music. I just mean to say that sometimes when we get up close and personal with a celebrity, well, it may or may not be what we expected. They may or may not be like we thought they would be. The truth is, they're real people with real problems. What if you could get up close and personal with God? Like, what would that be like? Would it be what we expected? Would it not be what we expected? That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's turn in the Bible to two places. First, I want to encourage you to turn to Luke chapter 19. When you get there, save your place and turn to Mark chapter 11. So Luke 19, Mark 11. This is part of a message series called Convergence. That's what we call it when two or more things come together. And in Mark's gospel, we see eternity come together with time, heaven with earth, God with man. We see it on these pages, but we also see it in this place, this online space. And I trust that today we're going to see it as we talk about God up close and personal. I want to begin by talking about a God who laughs with us. So look with me at Mark 11, beginning in verse 1. Now when they drew near Jerusalem to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, and he said to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and as soon as you have entered it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has sat. Loose it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord has need of it,' and immediately he will send it here." So this is the start of what we sometimes call Holy Week. And just when we would expect the storyteller to speed up, he slows down. It's not unlike watching a Rocky movie where, like the middle third of the movie may cover weeks or months of training, and then the last third of the movie just covers the fight. In a similar way, Mark slows way down and gives us way more detail about these final days of Jesus' earthly life. If we thought of this trip, this final trip to Jerusalem, as a farewell tour of sorts, I'm imagining like a band on a farewell tour. Imagine the tour t-shirt. In the back of the shirt would be the place names of all the places that Jesus stopped and interacted with people. In Galilee, there were sold out shows. Then in Samaria, there were canceled shows due to protests and poor ticket sales. And then in Perea and Judea, there were more sold out shows. But with Passover just days away, only one thing stood between Jesus and Jerusalem, and that was the Mount of Olives. On the ascent, Jesus would first come to a place called Bethany. This was sort of a home away from home for him. He had friends who lived in Bethany. And then they would come to Bethphage. Once they got to Bethphage, they were less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and they were near the summit of the Mount of Olives. So Jesus wants to borrow a colt. You know, I pastored in Austin, Texas for 18 years, and when I read about this, I can't help but wonder if Jesus was a Texan at heart. It says that he wanted a colt on which no one has sat. That is, an unbroken colt. Jesus wanted a rodeo. Well, the truth is that anytime you were going to put something to a sacred task, you wanted something that had never been put into ordinary use. So that's the reason. But put yourself in the disciples' sandals. They had to be like, do what? That sounds like a colt jacking to me. In fact, I think I saw this in a video game once, Grand Theft Donkey. They were understandably concerned about taking this colt. But Jesus, he tells them what to say. If anyone stops them, they're to say, the Lord has need of it. It's like so Star Wars, so Jedi mind trick. The Lord has need of it. And then everything's going to be fine. So picking it up in verse 4. So they went their way and found the colt tied by the door outside on the street, and they loosed it. But some of those who stood there said to them, what are you doing, loosing the colt? And they spoke to them just as Jesus had commanded. Oh, eat it, the Lord does. Wrong story, sorry. Well, it's possible, and actually it says, so they let them go. It's possible that this whole thing was prearranged. If not, the owners were at least familiar with, if not followers of Jesus. And so all they needed to know was that Jesus needed the colt. Matthew tells us that they took not only the colt, but the donkey, that is the colt's mother. And so in verse 7, then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their clothes on the road, and others cut down leafy branches from the trees and spread them on the road. You know, we have this idiom, roll out the red carpet, and that's basically what everyone was doing. They made a makeshift saddle with clothing in verse 7. They made a red carpet with branches and clothing in verse 8. John tells us that these branches were palm branches, and that's why we sometimes call this event Palm Sunday. The ancient Hebrew prophet Zechariah had actually written about this day. In Zechariah 9 verse 9 it says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem, behold your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. You know, that prophecy was written more than 5 centuries before the time of Jesus. In his lifetime, he fulfilled not a few, but a few hundred such Old Testament prophecies. But on this occasion, Jesus did something he had never done before, and something he had never allowed others to do for him. He was going public with his identity. Throughout the Gospel of Mark, we've seen Jesus, tell people not to talk about what he had done for them. It was important that his notoriety not peak too soon. Now it's time. Now he's days away from the cross, and so he's making this public appearance as the Messiah. But in verse 9 it says, then those who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the kingdom of our father David that comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Now, here's that time where you want to save your place in Mark, and you want to turn to the place that you saved in Luke 19. I want to read a couple of verses now that are in Luke that aren't in Mark. So Luke 19, beginning in verse 39, it says, and some of the Pharisees called to him from the crowd, teacher, rebuke your disciples. But he answered and said to them, I tell you that if these should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out. Now, just as an aside, the Pharisees, man, they just didn't get it on this and so many other occasions. They missed their opportunity to worship because they were whining. Whiners are not worshipers. And when we come to a worship experience with a critical spirit, we're not going to experience worship. So when Jesus said what he did, it's interesting, this reference to the stones. He says, I tell you that if these should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out. Now, Jesus wasn't talking about Mick and Keith, although I'm certain they were alive then. He was talking about how if these people gathered together weren't to worship him that inanimate objects would. Now, I like it that some translations, including the New American Standard Bible and the New Living Translation, include an exclamation mark, because I think that Jesus said it with joy in his heart, with laughter even. The way I tried to read it, I tried to give it that tone as I read it. You know, God is different sometimes than we think he is. And in the Old Testament, I think about how, like in the creation story, at the end of each day of creation, you know, it tells us that God looked at what he had created and said that it was good. It's kind of like at the end of each day, God is like, yes. And then in the New Testament, think of this. Let's look at Jesus for a moment through the eyes of his enemies. You know, they said that he was a party animal. Yeah, they said that he enjoyed the good times a little more than a religious person or a spiritual leader should. Now, keep in mind, Jesus never did anything inappropriate, but Jesus certainly did teach us that life is not something to be endured, it is something to be enjoyed. In Zephaniah 3, verse 17, another prophet says, "The Lord your God will rejoice over you with singing." Anybody watching this online service like musicals? You know, in a musical, people sing things that they would normally say. And when you're watching a musical, you can often tell when that's about to happen. You know, because they have a normal look on their face and they're speaking like in a normal cadence, but all of a sudden their cadence starts to change, the look on their face changes. The next thing you know, they're singing. So it's like you could tell when a song is coming. And what if people did that in real life? You know, like what if you were out on a date and you're having a conversation with this person, and you know, as they're speaking to you, all of a sudden you notice that their cadence changes, that the look on their face changes, and all of a sudden they're singing. It would be weird, right? You'd be so out of there. God does that. And he's totally unembarrassed. We're talking about a God who laughs with us. And you know what makes God happy? We get a hint here because Jesus is responding to what the people were saying. And the people, well, they were quoting Psalm 118, verses 25 and 26. Psalm 118 is the last of the so-called Hallel Psalms. The word Hallel means praise. So you know what makes God happy? When we praise him for what he's done for us. When we worship him for who he is to us. The psalmist says in Psalm 69, beginning in verse 30, "I will praise the name of God with a song and will magnify him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord." It's pleasing to God when we sing to him, when we worship him. It makes him happy. Now, God doesn't need our worship, but he does seek it. One time, Jesus was having a conversation with a woman outside of town. He was at the city well, and he said to her that the Father is seeking true worshipers to worship him. Now, this situation, this scene is almost humorous. Picture Jesus, you know, riding on a colt. He's not on the donkey, he's on the colt. I mean, his sandaled feet are probably, you know, dragging in the sand. It would have made people perhaps want to laugh. But it suggests how approachable Jesus was and is. How approachable this God who laughs with us is. Do you ever wonder what God does while we worship? I mean, he knows all, so it doesn't surprise him. He owns all, so it doesn't enrich him. He is all that, so it doesn't improve him. But God responds to worship. The Bible reveals God not as a force, not as an impersonal force, but as a person. And so as we worship, we relate to him, and he responds to us in ways that we cannot fully understand. God interacts with us as we worship him. Now, you know, we don't go to church to worship. We go to church to worship publicly. We go to church to worship corporately, that is, together with other worshipers. But as it says in Hebrews 13, verse 15, let us continually offer the sacrifice of praise to God. Or Psalm 34, verse 1, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. We can worship anytime and any place. And I think that so often, the worship that we experience in a worship gathering, like a church service, has everything to do with our personal worship throughout the week. I love too that this worship was physical. Like the people were very physically engaged, right? Making the makeshift saddle and rolling out the red carpet and, you know, moving alongside the colt. I mean, it was all very physical, and we can be physical in our worship too. We can stand, we can sit, we can kneel, we can worship with our head bowed or lifted, we can lift our hands. Psalm 134 verse 2 says, lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord. If that's new for you to see people lift their hands during worship, you might think it's kind of weird, but it's something that people of faith have been doing for centuries, for millennia. They've been lifting their hands as they worship the Lord. So go for it. As you worship God, go for it. Be physical, be engaged. Up close and personal, we're talking about a God who laughs with us, but we want to talk too, before we're done, about a God who cries with us. So picking it up where we left off in Luke, before we go back to Mark. In Luke 19, beginning in verse 41, it says, now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. I want you to think with me about this list. An anniversary, like a wedding anniversary, for example. A baptism or birthday. When daylight saving time begins or ends. A dentist or doctor appointment. Early release day for the kids. A graduation, jury duty, a wedding or funeral. These are all days we should have known, dates we should have remembered, things we could not afford to miss, things that when we realize we've forgotten, we're like, oh no, this was that kind of day. In verse 42, Jesus said, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day. In verse 44, he said, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Now, I'm not going to have you turn there, but I'm going to just relate this to you. If you're taking notes, you can jot down Daniel chapter 9, because that's where this thing that I'm going to relate to you is found. It's found in Daniel 9, verses 25 and 26. There was a prophecy there. When the prophecy was given, Babylon had destroyed Jerusalem, and so most of those living in Judah had been taken into captivity, including Daniel. And so Daniel gave this prophecy saying that eventually a command would be given to restore and build Jerusalem, and that from that time, from the time of the command until the Messiah was cut off, would be 483 years. Well, there are 3 such decrees, but only one that matches the details of the prophecy, and that's the one given by Artaxerxes in 444 BC. If you were to add 483 years to that, bearing in mind that the Jewish calendar has 360 days, so we're going to add 173,880 days to that, you come to the date that many scholars believe is this occasion, the triumphal entry, or Palm Sunday, just days before Jesus' crucifixion. You can check out the research of Harold Honer and Josh McDowell if you want to learn more. But back to Luke chapter 19, no sooner does the city of Jerusalem burst into view than Jesus bursts into tears. So it's not the first time we've seen Jesus cry. John talks about Jesus crying at a grave before this. And it's not the last time we'll see him cry. Just days later, he'll be crying in a garden. But on this occasion, the Greek verb translated wept in verse 41 means to weep loudly. Man, this took a turn, didn't it? From this celebration filled with laughter, Jesus is suddenly weeping loudly. I wonder how awkward this was. Almost as an aside, let me just mention that real men cry. They do. Jesus himself cried. Well, we talked some weeks ago about a couple of ancient customs related to tears. We talked about that custom where when a loved one passed, you would, as you wept, you would capture those tears in a bottle and then bury them with that bottle. It was a token of your grief and of your love. We talked also about a similar tradition where if a young man was sent off to war, his mother or his wife, whenever she thought about him, worried about him, cried for him, would capture those tears in a bottle. And then if and when he came home safely, he would be presented with that bottle and he would see all of that love. So it's an amazing thing to stop and think about how much we matter to God, that he would weep for us, that he would shed tears for us. It tells us how much he feels our pain and how deeply loved we are. Talking about a God who cries with us. You know what makes God sad? Well, in this particular instance, Jesus is looking at this city that had become more than usual even, a hub of activity. I mean, he could see the busy streets. He could see the steady stream of Passover pilgrims entering the city. He could see all of this religious observation, but he could also see that people, many of them, were simply going through the motions. He could see their wasted lives. He could see their missed opportunities, and he could see their future. Jesus foresaw something that wouldn't happen for 40 more years. Jesus foresaw the destruction of Jerusalem, the death of some 600,000 Jews. He could see the soldiers and the swords. He could see the battering rams and catapults. He could see the bloodshed. He could hear the cries. He could feel the pain. Jesus saw it all. Jesus was so near Jerusalem, and yet Jerusalem was so far from Jesus, and he's so near us. Sometimes we're so far from him. When we go through the motions, substituting religion for relationship, when we waste our lives instead of investing them, when we miss opportunities instead of taking advantage of them, what warning might you be ignoring? We see that there was this prophecy that foretold this day, and we see that Jesus is warning them about what's to come just a few decades later. Is God speaking to you about something? Sometimes I think that God is looking at our lives and he can see that we're off, even just a degree here or just a degree there, but he can see the end result of that. He can see the end result of neglecting an important relationship over time. He can see the end result of abusing drugs or alcohol or food over time. He can see the result of us mismanaging money over time. And maybe he's speaking to you. Maybe this isn't for everybody, but someone watching this online service, maybe God is speaking to you and warning you about a particular area of your life. What warning might you be ignoring? When God looks at your future, does he weep? Imagine that Jesus is standing on the Mount of Olives, and instead of looking over Jerusalem, he's looking over your life, into your future, into mine. What does he see? We can't do anything about the past, but we can do something about the future. If we'll take to heart that warning that maybe he's lovingly giving us, if we'll be moved by his tears for us. Well, back in Mark 11, we're just going to look at one more verse. Mark 11, verse 11, it says that Jesus went into Jerusalem and into the temple. So when he had looked around at all things, as the hour was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So retraced his steps through the Kidron Valley, up the Mount of Olives, through Bethphage, and finally to Bethany, where he would spend the night with his disciples. Up close and personal. Man, we got to see Jesus being so vulnerable, showing us the side of him that laughs, showing us the side of him that weeps. I love that the Bible reveals God as a person who experiences these and other emotions. And one of the greatest things about this reminder is that it brings us back to the fact that God is not only a person, but he wants to have a personal relationship with us. If that's new for you, I just encourage you to open your heart, to ask God to forgive you, to ask God to come into your life. Trust Jesus to be your forgiver and your leader, and begin to relate to God as a person. Begin to enjoy a personal relationship with him. And for those that are somewhere on that path, you're a person of faith, you've been forgiven, you have this relationship with God, just a reminder of how personal God wants to be. how truly engaged He wants to be with us, how each and every day He wants there to be this deep, deep, deep connection. I hope that you're walking in that. I hope that you're enjoying that. I hope that throughout this week you can really fully just be aware of that and live in that reality. Father, thank you for what we see of your Son Jesus and what that tells us about you, what we learn about God in this passage. I just pray that it would be really meaningful for us to see you laughing and to see you crying and to understand how real you are, how personal you are, how relatable you are, how approachable you are, how loving and caring and engaged you are with us. And I pray, Lord, that this week could be filled with very intimate interaction with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card. To let us know you joined us today or to request information about our virtual small groups, go to solachurch.life and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. And don't forget to follow us on social media. It's at Sola Church LA on all your favorite apps. Have a great week and we'll see you next time for Easter Sunday at Sola Church Online.